Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arch Asle, and I serve as Executive Vice President for Finance Administration for Soka University of America. And on behalf of the entire university community, I'd like to welcome you to Day 2 of this year's Nobel Peace Seminar, where today's discussion will focus on, can a peace prize prevent nuclear war? Yesterday, we had a stimulating conversation and discussion focused on the pressing peace issues of our time and how the Nobel Peace Prize and Soka University of America can contribute to world peace. We heard how the irrepressible power of positivity, creativity, and person-to-person dialogue can become the counterbalance, the negative forces that lead to war, enable each of us to become the point of light for peacemaking. Today, we're joined by another distinguished group of panelists. Returning to the stage is Dr. Asle Toje, Deputy Leader of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. In addition, we have Dr. William Porter, Founding Director of the James Martin Center for the Non-Proliferation Studies at Middlebury Institute of International Studies, and Dr. Ivana Nikolic Hughes, President of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. Moderating today's panel will be Alexander Herring, Distinguished Adjunct Professor and Senior Research Fellow of the Nuclear Abolition Project at the Soka Institute for Global Solutions here at SUA. This aspect of peace lies at the heart of who we are. And I'd like to reiterate what I shared yesterday that our university president had shared in response to the conflicts and tribulations in our world. He said the following: "As president of Soka University of America, I reaffirm a fundamental principle that lies at the very heart of our institution, an unwavering opposition to all forms of war and violence. War is counter to Soka's proud heritage and its commitment to peace. Our mission to educate global citizens imbued with wisdom, courage, and compassion has never been more urgent. In these times, our commitment to peace must be deepened. Let's become role models of fostering peace beginning in our community." As I shared yesterday, peace has always been a focal point for Soka ever since the founder of Soka Education and his protege, Tsunosaburo Makiguchi and Josei Tada, were arrested in 1943 by the Japanese military government for their opposition to the war and for advocating educational principles that fostered individual student thinking and happiness versus the collective groupthink and allegiance to the state the government wanted. Makiguchi and Toda's unwillingness to recant these views, as well as recant their belief in Nichiren Buddhism and adopt the state religion, resulted in their being thrown into prison. Makiguchi died in prison in 1944 for his beliefs, and when the war ended, Toda rebuilt the organization focused on peace and what can be done to prevent war from ever happening again. Our topic today on the abolition of nuclear weapons has been a focus of the Soka organization ever since Mr. Toda issued a declaration on September 8, 1957, condemning nuclear weapons as an absolute evil which threatened humanity's right to live and called for their prohibition. He stated, in the midst of the Cold War, quote, "Although a movement calling for a ban on the testing of nuclear weapons has arisen around the world, it is my wish to go further, to attack the problem at its root. I want to expose and rip out the claws that lie hidden in the very depths of such weapons." He further states, "Why do I say this? Because we, the people of the world, have an inviolable right to live. Anyone who jeopardizes that right is a devil incarnate, a fiend, a monster," unquote. Our university founder and Mr. Toda's successor, Daisaku Ikeda, has carried forth his mentor's declaration and determination and has published 40 peace proposals since 1983 to 2022 and has submitted those to the United Nations and the world community, focusing on the key challenges that the global society faces in realizing peace and human security, of which the annual recurring theme is the abolition of nuclear weapons. He shared in his last proposal, quote, "In a dialogue former President Mikhail Gorbachev and I conducted, he emphasized, it is becoming ever more clear that nuclear weapons cannot be a means for achieving national security. In fact, with each pressing year, nuclear weapons puts our security even more in question," unquote. Mr. Ikeda continued in his peace proposal, quote, "I remember as if it were yesterday my mentor's indignation at the inhumane nature of nuclear weapons, which can rob each of us of the meaning and dignity of our lives and can destroy the workings of human society root and branch. As his disciple, determined to realize his vision, I felt his righteous anger in the depths of my very being, with the conviction that the destiny of humankind cannot be transformed without resolving the challenges of nuclear weapons, the fundamental evil of modern civilization. I have consistently addressed this issue in my annual proposals since 1983 and have worked for the outlawing of nuclear weapons, unquote. Even after issuing his 40th peace proposal in January of 2022, Mr. Kelly issued 3 additional statements in 22 and 23, calling for nuclear weapon states to pledge no first use of these weapons to avoid catastrophe, stating, quote, "Commitment to policies of no first use is indeed a prescription of hope. It can serve as an axis connecting the twin wheels of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons." Our university founder concluded his April 27, 2023 statement with the following, quote, "I would like to declare now is the time. Let us once again change the course of history through the power of people, paving a path toward a world free of nuclear weapons, a world free of war," unquote. With that as our mandate, I'd like to turn things over to our moderator, Professor Harang, to begin the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arch, for setting us off. Yes, and thank you all, you wonderful people I can see in front of me, because we need you, every single one of you. What we're going to deal with today is not an easy task. We're going to deal with nuclear disarmament. So, today we will explore the topic of nuclear disarmament and whether the peace prizes awarded during the atomic age have mitigated the risk of nuclear war. And we have a very distinguished panel with us today to explore this theme. I'm not really sure if it could possibly be better. I don't think so. Because these people you see up front here, let's start with Dr. Toje. He is the deputy chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. So that's the group of 5 that actually decides who gets to be awarded with the Peace Prize. Before he came into that position, he spent 10 years as the research director of the Nobel Institute. And also, he's a visiting professor over at the University of Cambridge in UK. And of course, a person that many of you will know through his books and research in this field. I'm pretty serious when I say that I don't think we could have a more informed and competent person with us to make this assessment. Whether a nuclear peace prize have actually contributed to preventing nuclear war. I don't think there's anyone in the world who can do that assessment better than that person. Secondly, William Potter, that's a legend. I think all of you know him in some way or form. There must be, because he's been around for a very long time. And,
thanks a lot.
And he knows the inner workings of the UN disarmament machinery better than most people, let's say, to be modest, right? He is the founding the founding president of CNS at Monterey, of course. But he also has experience from what nuclear, what kind of disarmament process in the UN or non-proliferation process is it that you don't have any first-hand experience from? That's maybe the question. We're talking NPT, nuclear proliferation treaty. We're talking, any kind of UN process really, or any kind of international disarmament machinery. He's probably had his hand on it. So he's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise to add to this conversation. And of course, Ivana Hughes. She is the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, which is very close to us, just 2.5 hours drive from here, up in Santa Barbara. So we definitely got to keep close to these people. They are a very, 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 maybe some of you know David Krieger, who's the founder of this organization, very well-known peace activist, maybe one of the greatest of them all. and the heritage and the connections to our founder. First of all, Soka and Krieger had a fantastic dialogue in a book called Choose Hope. In the back room here, we've been talking about how we can sort of make sure that we keep this connection. And I'm sure there's going to come a lot of positive things out of it. Now, Ivana is also on the scientific board of the TBMW, the ban treaty. So she is a technical expert when it comes to the impact of nuclear weapons use, in addition to being a very, very important peace activist in this field. So, with that said, there's something in the title today. There's an assumption there. Can a nuclear, or can a peace prize prevent nuclear war? There's an assumption being made there. There's something about the threat of nuclear war. Is it a real threat? That's one of the first things we need to address. Is it a real threat? Just have a think about it. Where are we at right now? In this country, we have 1,770 nuclear weapons deployed at this moment. 1,770. If Biden decides to press the button, we will have about 15 minutes from now, and they will be flying off to Russia. On the Russian side, 1,647, as of today, nuclear weapons deployed. Putin will have maybe about 6 minutes of reflection time before he chooses to press the button, fire back. That's the dark backdrop to this conversation. To what extent can we live with this risk? What are we actually risking? That's a big question to be answered. And of course, in our exercise to come, when we delve into some of the nuclear peace prizes, as we call them, the Nobel Peace Prizes that is awarded for efforts made in the field of non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament. And we're going to assess whether this was successful or not, whether, has it helped us in terms of arms control, in terms of non-proliferation, in terms of disarmament. When we dig into the details, we will go closely into a few of those prizes to discuss the efforts made and the efforts awarded and what the consequences of those have been. But we can't forget that big black dark backdrop, the real threat of actual use of nuclear weapons. And now I invite the one and only Bill Potter.
So first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, and I really want to express my tremendous appreciation to the hosts for inviting me to participate in this very important event. And it's also been exceptionally pleasurable to have spent the past 2 days with you and to have met both old friends and many new ones. I'm especially grateful to participate on this panel as I had the privilege in the spring of 2009 to spend nearly 2 months as a visiting fellow at the Nobel Peace Institute in Oslo. So it's good to connect with the old friends from Oslo. I also have had the privilege to interact closely with 2 past Nobel Peace Prize recipients. Former International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Mohammed El-Baradei, who won the prize jointly with the IAEA in 2005, and Beatrice Finn, former Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICON as it's usually known, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. In addition, I was part of a trio of individuals who nominated 2 of my heroes, former Senators Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar, for the Nobel Peace Prize on multiple occasions for their extraordinary foresight in championing the cooperative threat reduction program between the United States and the Russian Federation. We were unsuccessful in securing the award for the 2 senators but I've been told that they came very close to winning the prize on at least one occasion. Having noted my own very peripheral connection with the Peace Prize, let me turn to the two specific questions I was asked to address in my opening remarks by our conference organizers. First, why nuclear weapons issues are so important to me personally. And secondly, how can the Peace Prize contribute to the prevention of nuclear war? I'll try to unpack that in the, probably about 9 minutes that are left to me. It's a tough kind of task, but I'll do my best. Let me begin by observing what I regard to be the nature of the human condition in the post-World War II era of nuclear weapons. It was succinctly stated by General Omar Bradley, the senior military commander at the start of the Korean War in 1950. He observed, and I'm quoting now, "We live in an age of nuclear giants and ethical infants, in a world that has achieved brilliance without wisdom, power without conscience. We have solved the mystery of the atom and forgotten the Sermon on the Mount. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about dying than we know about living." I couldn't agree more. I'm too young, believe it or not, Alexander, to remember firsthand the Korean War. But I am old enough to recall vividly the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, a time when every day when I left for school, I wondered if the world was about to end. It was the time when Bobby Kennedy would recall that World War III would be fought with atomic weapons and the next war with sticks and stones. That close call in 1962 had major implications for nuclear arms control and led both the US and Soviet leadership to conclude that they shared an important interest in avoiding a nuclear holocaust and pursuing nuclear arms control. Regrettably, it is a lesson that the Russian leadership appears to have forgotten today. I hope we can return to this issue later in our discussion. I believe it has great significance for our current nuclear predicament. Let me now turn to the question posed by the title of our seminar, Can a Nuclear Peace Prize Prevent Nuclear War? In my view, it's very unlikely that a peace prize by itself can prevent a nuclear war, or at least it cannot directly prevent the occurrence of the use of nuclear weapons. There simply are too many states with nuclear arsenals whose security policies emphasize the role of nuclear weapons. Moreover, there is the potential for nuclear weapons to be used due to accidents and miscalculations as well as by design. In addition, there is the potential for nuclear violence to be precipitated by non-state actors or terrorists. Given the multiple means by which nuclear violence could arise, it would be presumptuous to assume that any action short of the complete elimination of nuclear weapons could prevent nuclear war. However, if one poses the question slightly differently and asks, have past nuclear peace prizes had an effect in our quest for a world free of nuclear weapons? Or to what extent have the prizes contributed to nonproliferation? The answers are more encouraging. And I would definitely answer in the affirmative to the question, can and should the Nobel Peace Prize be an instrument to reinforce the nuclear taboo? Let me elaborate with respect to two issues related to nuclear weapons. First, about how the Peace Prize already has had a positive impact. And secondly, about a vital but underappreciated approach to nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation in which Japan has played a leading role. In my view, one of the most important means for promoting both nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation is the creation of nuclear weapon-free zones. The first zone in a populated area was the Treaty of Tlatelolco in Latin America and the Caribbean, which entered into force in 1969, actually before the NPT entered into force. Its principal architect and proponent was the Mexican diplomat Alfonso Garcia Robles, who in 1982 shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Swedish diplomat, politician, and champion of nuclear disarmament, Alva Myrdal. I believe it is fair to say that the recognition by the Nobel Academy of the extraordinary work of Garcia Robles in securing the Treaty of Tlatelolco gave a major boost to efforts worldwide to make the world both a better place and freer of nuclear weapons. In fact, today there are 5 nuclear weapons-free zones across the globe. And at my last count, there were at least 113 states parties to these zones. Collectively, they cover over 50% of the Earth's land surface and all of the territory of the southern hemisphere. As a result of the entry into force of the Central Asian Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone in 2009, a zone whose negotiation I had the opportunity to assist, nuclear weapons-free zones today also extend into the northern hemisphere. Regrettably, however, nuclear weapons-free zones have failed to be adopted in some regions that most need them, including certainly the Middle East. The second issue I wish to touch upon very briefly concerns the appalling level of ignorance and complacency about nuclear weapons that is prevalent in almost all countries and affects not only the public at large, but far too many of its political leaders. While this knowledge deficit is deplorable and very dangerous, it also is understandable given the limited opportunities young people have to learn about the effects of nuclear weapons and means to mitigate their spread and use. It was this recognition that led me, when I had the opportunity to serve on the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board for Disarmament Matters, to propose the creation of a UN experts group on disarmament and non-proliferation education, and to assist in the introduction of the same topic as a regular subject for consideration in the NPT treaty review process. I was very fortunate that one of my colleagues on the board was the distinguished Mexican diplomat Miguel Marin Bosch, who persuaded his government to introduce a resolution at the UN General Assembly that incorporated my UN experts group proposal, which passed unanimously. Parenthetically here, I would note that one of the 10 experts appointed to the group was the Japanese diplomat, then a mid-career diplomat by the name of Yukiya Amano, who at the time was the principal Japanese government expert on disarmament and non-proliferation education. We became close friends. He subsequently joined my center in Monterey as a diplomat in residence before being recalled to Tokyo, appointed as the Japanese ambassador to the IAEA, and then elected 3 times to the post of Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The underlying premise of the experts group on disarmament and non-proliferation education, which made possible the adoption by consensus of 34 recommendations, was the need to focus on the development of critical thinking skills. That is, not what to think, but rather how to think. Among the expert group recommendations, which were adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2002, was the importance of active or participatory learning, in which young people learn by role-playing or simulations. I have found this approach to be especially important in fostering empathy or seeing with the eyes of others, something that is glaringly absent in global politics today. It is the approach I employ in my semester-long NPT arms control negotiation simulation in Monterey, which last year, I am pleased to note, included a brilliant young India alumna from Soka University, Muskan Agrawal. I'm also very proud to note that another one of my extraordinary former simulation students, Ms. Gaukar Mukadjanova of Kazakhstan, has just been appointed as the holder of the inaugural Japan Chair for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, an appointment made possible by a very generous award by the government of Japan to the CNS branch office in Vienna, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nonproliferation Studies. 2 weeks ago, Gaucher was invited by the Japanese government, which had just assumed the presidency of the UN Security Council, to join Secretary General Guterres, Japanese Foreign Minister Kamigawa, and Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, Rob Floyd, in addressing the Security Council on how to promote progress on nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation. I applaud the Japanese government for its unprecedented support for disarmament and nonproliferation education. I also cite Gaucher's unusual accomplishment to highlight the power of education and the potential for all students in this audience to use the education they receive at Soka University to make a difference in a world desperately in need of more idealism and creativity. Perhaps someday one of you will be recognized by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee for your accomplishments. It is well within the realm of the possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Alexander, for the introduction, and to all of the organizers for inviting me to this important conversation and to this beautiful campus. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be here with esteemed panelists and with all of you. In 1938, in the laboratories of Columbia University's Puking Hall, physicist I.I. Rabi discovered a curious feature of hydrogen atoms, atoms that are part of every water molecule and every part of your body. Rabi found that when hydrogen atoms are placed in a magnetic field, they release radio signals at particular frequencies. In 1944, Rabi won the Nobel Prize in Physics for this discovery. Now, fast forward to the 1970s, when Paul Lauterbur figured out a way to use this phenomenon to image the human body, a discovery for which he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2003, known now as magnetic resonance imaging. In the late 1980s, and near the end of his life, Rabi actually went into an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging machine himself. And he would state, "I never thought my work would come to this." Many in this audience may have gotten an MRI scan. Most probably realize that this technology has allowed doctors to identify and treat injuries and tumors. Neuroscientists even use a version of magnetic resonance imaging called functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, to learn about what happens in our brains when we perform certain tasks and to treat different brain conditions and diseases. The story of Rabi's discovery illustrates two fundamental principles about how science progresses and the role the Nobel Prize winning or worthy work has played in this journey. The first is that such discoveries exist on a path that, while not always and at all times linear, eventually lead toward more and further understanding, what we might call progress. The other fundamental principle is that although one can guarantee that we will know more in the coming decades, there's no predicting what it is that we will uncover and how. Rabi could not have imagined that his discovery of nuclear magnetic resonance could lead to spaceship-like machines that can peer into our bodies without any harmful radiation like X-rays, and even peer into the secrets of our brains. Contrast Rabi's discovery with another physicist's contribution, those of Lisa Meitner, who figured out that when bombarded with neutrons, these are subatomic particles found in the atoms that make up you and everything you have ever seen or touched, certain atoms split into other, smaller atoms, releasing energy. Meitner did not win a Nobel Prize in physics, others did, for carrying out the experiments, but her discovery led to the development of atomic bombs just several years later. In 1945, the United States tested the Trinity bomb in New Mexico, causing suffering for the fallout victims and their descendants to this day. We then went on to use 2 atomic bombs in attacks on Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The scale of death and destruction and devastation, both short and long term, is impossible to comprehend. Like Rabi, Meitner may not have imagined where her discovery would lead us. But was this progress? I contend that arriving at the ability to kill hundreds of thousands and today even hundreds of millions of people was not progress. As our nuclear weapons arsenals grew and the bombs in possession of today 9 nuclear weapon states became more powerful, more precise, and able to be delivered anywhere in the world, today's weapons threaten to destroy human civilization as we know it, and even life on Earth. This is not a matter of science fiction, novels, or films, but a scientific understanding of what would happen to our planet and to humanity in case of widespread nuclear war. A primary consequence of fires from nuclear weapon attacks would be enormous amounts of soot that would go into the atmosphere, which would in turn dramatically block incoming sunlight from reaching us, which would lead to significant drops in temperature and furthermore widespread failure of agriculture and food production lasting many years. This is called nuclear winter and nuclear famine, and would lead to more than 2 billion people dying from starvation around the world in a scenario of a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, and more than 5.5 billion people dying from starvation due to a nuclear war between US and Russia, in which the US and Russia use just 1/3 of their current arsenals. Is this progress? And if not, who erred and when? Was it the scientists or the politicians or both? Every single day that these weapons are on our planet, they threaten everything you love and everything you hold dear. They threaten life itself. Let's now contrast the accomplishments of physicists with those of numerous peacemakers, disarmament activists, diplomats, scientists, and many others who have done Nobel Peace Prize winning or worthy work. 2 essential points need to be made. Number 1, like the physicists, the peacemakers and disarmament proponents cannot always predict what exactly will do the most good and where their work might lead. But in contrast to one discovery leading to another in physics, with peace, progress is decisively not linear. While one can certainly use certain proxies to argue that humanity may be better off today than at any point in time in history, we are living in exceedingly challenging and dangerous times, both nationally and internationally. When it comes to global peace, we are decisively worse off than we have been since the end of the Cold War, and probably even longer than that. On nuclear disarmament, while we have far fewer than the 70,000 nuclear warheads that existed in 1986, we still have about 12,500 too many. While we have conflicts involving nuclear weapon possessors raging and geopolitical tensions rising, we also have a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, or TPNW. It is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and often 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of path. Daisaku Ikeda, the great Soka Gakkai leader and founder of this amazing university, and David Krieger, founder and president emeritus of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, both of whom we sadly lost last year, in their book, Choose Hope, spoke about the way in which peace is not simply there for the taking once achieved. Instead, they discussed the need to nurture peace, stating that, quote, sowing seeds of peace demands perseverance. Once planted, the seeds require nurturing. In other words, the peace process requires sustained commitment, end of quote. So I propose that instead of saying that we're not where we need to be, we should try to imagine a world without Joseph Rothblatt and Setsuko Thurlow and Richard Falk and Andrei Sakharov and David Krieger and Alfonso Garcia Robles and Alva Myrdal and Linus Pauling and Beatrice Finn and Daisaku Ikeda and Nelson Mandela, and so many others. I contend that without them and their work, we might not be here to have this discussion. Today, while being vaguely aware of nuclear weapons, the vast majority of people do not understand what is at stake. And that is where the Nobel Peace Prize Committee can help by awarding the prize to people and organizations who are doing the work of bringing awareness and solutions that will lead us to a world free of nuclear weapons and free of this existential threat. That's helping us to raise more awareness. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, in particular, is a young treaty, and it needs our help. People need to know about it and what it aims to accomplish. People need to know that we all stand to gain if nuclear weapons are eliminated. It is also essential to realize that disarmament and peace are not 2 separate journeys. They may at times pursue their own short detours, but they are ultimately, always, part of the same road towards a better world. When it comes to nuclear weapon possessors, peace is not just a moral imperative. It is an existential imperative. No nation, let alone national leader, should have the ability to destroy all of humanity. Nuclear weapons must go, and the Nobel Peace Prize can help make it so. Let me end with the words of General Lee Butler, who during the Cold War was commander of US strategic forces, in other words, in charge of US's vast nuclear arsenal of strategic, that means very powerful and able to go very far, nuclear weapons. This is a quote from 1996, and it comes from Ikeda and Krieger's book, Choose Hope. Quote, we cannot at once keep sacred the miracle of existence and hold sacrosanct the ability to destroy it. Think about that. Miracle of existence versus the capacity to destroy it. End of quote. We must choose hope, that it is possible to hold on to the former and to eliminate the latter. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, they say it never rains in Southern California. Isn't it gorgeous? Just, to draw breath, to be alive, when the rain cleans the air somehow. It's a luxury. I think that in these times, we must look on the bright side. We must remain cheerful. Alfred Nobel. I don't think at first he thought about including a peace prize amongst the prizes that he was going to leave his vast fortune. Alfred Nobel was an odd one, maybe a bit like Elon Musk, hugely talented, famous inventor, very wealthy, bachelor. And when he wrote his last will and testament in Paris in 1895, it was quite clear that he was very well familiar with the peace movement that had sprung up in Europe around those times. This peace movement had everything to do with the destructiveness of modern weaponry, modern artillery, smoke-free gunpowder. We spoke yesterday about the Battle of Solferino, which I, to my shame, put the wrong year on. It wasn't in 1864, it was in 1859. But the point was that in this battle, some 300,000 people fought, and some 70,000 were killed or maimed. This was far beyond any other scale that they had seen, and it gave people pause, a concern about the future. Well, the future they feared came into reality with World War I, industrialized slaughter. The Nobel Peace Prize came a bit perhaps late to the party when it came to nuclear disarmament. It's easy to forget that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki didn't actually cause widespread shock when it first happened. There was great joy that the war was opened, and so much enthusiasm about what this nuclear age might bring. All over the United States, all the countries, you got things like the nuclear laundromat. Like nuclear was very hot. This is the age of superheroes, taking a swim in a polluted lake and becoming very, very powerful. In 1952, the Nobel Committee awarded what I see as the first nuclear award to Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer was not awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his nuclear engagement. On the contrary, he was given the Peace Prize for his humanitarian efforts and the fight against leprosy. But he wasn't able to attend to give his speech the same year. In the year and a half that passed between the award and him actually giving the address, he had sort of a road to Damascus moment, and that was very much because he was in dialogue with many of these people that we will be referring today. People like Einstein, Oppenheimer, and in the beginning, the destructiveness of nuclear weapons was knowledge that was reserved to the scholarly community, putting the scholars in a very, very difficult situation. I don't know if you've all seen the Oppenheimer movie, but one of the key themes in this movie is how the man who invented the bomb struggles with the impact of his invention and also the lack of understanding amongst politicians. Albert Schweitzer says in the speech when he finally held it, he says, and the speech was called The Problem of Peace. Modern war is different from wars of the past. And wars now employ weapons of death and destruction incomparably more effective than in the past, and is consequently more evil than ever before. This is a time when leaders like the founders of the Soka Kai and others were speaking about nuclear weapons in very, very plain modern terms. We somehow lost that along the way. Another man who won a Nobel Prize in 1954 was Linus Pauling. He's one of two people who actually only won two Nobel Prizes in different fields alone, the other being Madame Curie. So the students, if you're wondering why you have one building called Madame Curie and one called Linus Pauling, well, that might be the reason. It's a rare thing. I should have said Noel Baker got it in '59, and this was an idea that nuclear disarmament should take place through the frameworks of the newly established United Nations. Linus Pauling received the Nobel Peace Prize for his nuclear engagement in '63, and this was very much in the shadow of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment, I believe, when knowledge that had been widespread in scholarly communities finally emerged into the mainstream, where people started giving some serious thought about what the consequences of nuclear war would be. Since then, the Nobel Peace Prize has given a great number of prizes to people and institutions working with the nuclear issue. As a matter of fact, no single issue has been lifted forward more frequently than the nuclear cause. I find it quite interesting that this year, and I hope some of the students will listen now, 50 years ago, Isaku Sato received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work for confidence building in Asia and for his instrumental part in bringing Japan into the non-proliferation treaty. I know that Sato has had somewhat of a tarnished legacy in Japan, but I imagine Sato might be a candidate that would be, a good candidate for some revisionist thinking. I think his legacy perhaps stands in a bit of a different light today than it did in the closing stages of the Vietnam War and the cynicism, the widespread cynicism that was prevalent at that time. One of my favorite nuclear awards, and I know I share that with the professors, is Sakharov. Sakharov was not awarded the prize for his nuclear work. He was a physicist by training, and he was seen as the father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb. I just wanted to, now that we keep things, pretty dark here, let me be a little bit positive. About a year ago, I visited the most secret nuclear city in Kazakhstan, which is currently named Kurchatov. This is one of the areas in the world where the most nuclear on-land testings have taken place. Huge problems with radioactivity. And in a building in Kurchatov, which is a pretty beat-up city, for the Japanese here, it might be interesting to hear that it was actually built by Japanese POWs. They have a research center where young scholars, very enthusiastic, filled with a passion of science, were experimenting with planting different types of growths that could suck the radiation out of the soil to clean it, which I found incredibly inspiring. And to spend this afternoon with these scientists, it gave me life force to live a very long life. So we must not despair. There are many children of light out there, not only children of darkness. Professor Potter mentioned Alonso Garcia Robles and Alva Myrdal in 1982 and the work that would translate into the nuclear-free zones movement. For me, the first sort of engagement that I had with the Nobel Peace Prize and the nuclear issue was because my father was a member of nuclear Doctors Against Nuclear Weapons, the IPPNW. They received the Nobel Peace Prize for spreading knowledge about the dangers of nuclear war. And this is something that I would really impress upon you all, that whilst some peacemakers are engaged in the corridors of power, others are doing the noble work of telling their fellow man of this great danger we are living under. For me, I think the 1990s was a missed opportunity. I think with the end of the Cold War and the excellent efforts done by the non-Lugar program and Professor Potter, we are forever grateful for the work that you've done with the non-Lugar program to secure fissile materials in the former Soviet Union. Great successful project, but we fell asleep at the moment where we had chances to make deep cuts into the nuclear arsenals. It would have been possible. We focused on other things and we missed the bus. Even if Joe Rotblat and the Pugwash received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995, a hugely inspirational character, and the Pugwash is an organization of the nuclear physicists that is still operational, still inspirational. I don't think that for us being members of the civil society and the experts, we really missed the chance to push harder in the 1990s. In 2005, Mohammed Al-Baradei and the International Atomic Agency and their focus on how to use the nuclear power for peace rather as opposed to war. It's one of my favorite awards. And of course, as a member of the Nobel Committee, I have to remind you that the most controversial award in modern times, 2010, Barack Obama, it was, yes, it was a nuclear award. It was an award to a presidential candidate that in Prague had made maybe the most promising speech made by any American president towards promising to work for nuclear disarmament. And maybe it was a fool's hope, but I hope that you also see in that light that maybe the Nobel Committee, we weren't such fools. Maybe this was an unlikely bet, but a bet that maybe was still worth taking to try and remind the American president of his own words. The final Nobel Award so far was in 2017, where ICANN and the Treaty to Prevent Nuclear Weapons was awarded. I think that when we look on the 11 awards that has been given to the peacemakers, those who work for nuclear disarmament, we see sort of three tracks that might interest the students here. One, we have, in the most vulgar of terms, the influencer, the person who speaks out, the Albert Schweitzer, who uses his position to speak out, or her position out against nuclear weapons. I really find Alva Myrdal in the same category, a famous influencing person. Then we have the institution builders, people like Robles, but also I would count definitely Noel Baker and also Linus Pauling amongst the people who are trying to create the frameworks through which nuclear disarmament can come about. And you have two people here that I share the podium with, who have both spent their lives on this track. So important. And I think the third category would be those who collect facts. And I think this task is as important as it always had and have been, and I think that Pugwash has always been a source of information for all of us who work in the field. Looking forward, I see some things that we need to consider as members of the human race when it comes to the nuclear issue. Professor Potter and Professor Hughes both alluded to the lack of knowledge amongst those who wield nuclear weapons. This is something that has scared me and concerned me more than anything, is that we have leaders in countries who possess nuclear weapons who have only the most rudimentary understanding of the destructive potential and outfall of actual use of nuclear weapons. I think an issue that I hope the young people will think and work on is the issue of nuclear climate change. Even a small nuclear war, a limited nuclear war, where some 30 smaller Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons come into play, would create catastrophic climate change through pumping vast amounts of soot into the atmosphere and causing failed crops and harvests on a planet that already struggles to feed the population that's on it. Hundreds of millions of people would starve to death. The main problem wouldn't be the people who were scorched in the war. It would be the starvation crisis that would follow after. And this is something that we really need to consider. We should not be glib about nuclear weapons. And we should not think that, well, I live in a nuclear-free zone. Sucks to be the people who are living in countries that have nuclear weapons. No, this really, really concerns us all. I think that the issue that has been mentioned from the podium about no first use. This was the topic of one of the very last statements of Daisaku Ikeda. And Ikeda is a man to be taken seriously. He was a man who thought very seriously about nuclear disarmament. And this was the venue that he chose to highlight in one of his last long statements to the Hiroshima summit. And I really believe that this is what the nuclear powers owe the rest of us. They owe us a pledge not to use nuclear weapons first. This is the least we can expect. They promised much more in the NPT. In the NPT, they promised to work for disarmament. Right now, that seems unlikely. On the contrary, we seem to be in the early phases of a new nuclear arms race, where all the primary powers are renewing and revamping their arsenals. Nina Tannenwald is a scholar whose body of work will forever be associated with two words: nuclear taboo. As the treaties that were negotiated during the Cold War, some of which were awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize, have fallen to the wayside. And at a time when the NPT is in many ways the last man standing of the operable treaties governing the procurement and use of nuclear weapons, I think that this term, the nuclear taboo, is more important than ever. Ms. Tannenwald, or Dr. Tannenwald, has argued, and I agree with her on that the primary mechanism that has shielded us from nuclear war so far is the taboo against using them. This taboo might sound like a fledgling defense and also almost irrational to put one's faith in something as verbal as a taboo. It's still incredibly important. And this is where I'm going to end my talk. We have been talking about how a price can stave off nuclear war. I think that if you're going to make that argument, you will have to go via the agency of the nuclear taboo, by time and again directing the attention of the global populace towards the dangers of nuclear war. I believe the Nobel Peace Prize over time, and along with many other actors, have served to maintain this taboo. But this taboo needs to be maintained for each generation. Each generation needs to be told about what horrendous weapons we have developed and the terrible consequences of their use. The potential to end civilization itself. Dear friends, we started by enjoying a good breath of fresh air. Not all is lost. The world is moving in a very, very dangerous position or direction. I think that this should give us all pause to redirect our efforts towards working against nuclear weapons. And I would encourage all of you, in whatever manner is suitable for you, to try and spread this gospel, this taboo about the horrible consequences of nuclear weapons and the unacceptability of the prevalent role of nuclear weapons in the military doctrines of the great powers of today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, distinguished panelists. Really great to hear your perspectives, and you bring a lot of new issues to the table here. Let's start up with the last point being made by Dr. Toje. The world is moving in a very dangerous direction, just as Ivana said that we are living in an exceedingly more dangerous world. What is your perspective on exactly that, Dr. Potter?
That's better. Thank you very much for the, for the question. I attend lots of diplomatic gatherings, and almost every diplomat that I meet starts out by saying, I'm an optimist by nature. You can't be a diplomat without being an optimist. I have to inform you that I'm a pessimist by nature, and that probably has helped me persevere over the long period in which I've been active, in this field. I am particularly pessimistic for several reasons. One, I have little faith in the rationality of the decision-making process, even with respect to issues of an existential nature. I observe this all the time, and it worries me tremendously, even when one goes back and looks at some of the most severe crises that we've encountered in the past, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The degree to which non-rational factors influence decision-making. I also am particularly worried, not so much about a so-called strike from the blue, a planned nuclear attack, although I must say today I think that probability is greater than it has been in the past, particularly from the Russian side for reasons that we can talk about. And I should say it's an aside, it wasn't mentioned in the introduction. I've spent most of my professional career trying to promote both U.S.-Soviet and U.S.-Russian cooperation for non-proliferation. I've written lots of books on this topic. I've been very much engaged with Soviet and Russian colleagues, but I'm extremely depressed at the moment about the inability of the United States and the Russian Federation to cooperate in an area which was possible even during the most frigid moments of the Cold War. So I worry a great deal today that if we find ourselves in a situation where an accident occurs, there is a miscalculation, there is equipment failure, a Russian or American plane is shot down over the Baltic, over the Black Sea. We have some kind of an unanticipated, unplanned military encounter. That this will escalate very rapidly. There have been a number of very interesting studies conducted by various individuals. Some of you may have read Eric Schlosser's superb book looking at a number of nuclear accidents called Command and Control. My former deputy director, Patricia Lewis, also a former director of Unidir, now at Chatham House, was involved in a major study looking at close calls historically. I truly believe that if a number of these incidents were to be repeated today, that the outcome would be very, very different. In fact, we were chatting last night, one of the most famous or infamous incidents occurred in 1995 off the coast of Asle when a sounding rocket, a scientific rocket, was launched. It was interpreted initially by Russian authorities to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile, which was not an unreasonable assumption technically, given the fact that it was a multi-stage sounding rocket. Fortunately, and this may be apocryphal, but I've been told by some that President Yeltsin said, my good friend Bill would never do this to me. But whether that happened or not, fortunately, within a very short period of time, the Russian Command and Control determined that it was, in fact, not a submarine-launched ballistic missile. But that occurred in 1995, a period of reasonably good relations between our two countries. Today, I suspect that one would assume the worst. And there might well be a retaliatory strike, although the technical features might be exactly the same. And that emphasizes the importance of the political relationship. That's what's changed more than anything. And so I worry tremendously about the possibility of nuclear escalation and nuclear use due to accidents and miscalculations. That's what keeps me up. I mean, there are lots of things that keep me up at night, but I would put that perhaps highest on my list, if that's responsive to your question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hughes, what do we do about this? If we have a dangerously low threshold for actually using nuclear weapons, and the main challenge is the political environment, the climate, what do we do?
So let me just begin by putting perhaps a few numbers, which is difficult, but perhaps possible and informative to the extent that we can discuss them. And that is that when we're talking about the risk is really sort of a combination of the probability that something happens and the consequences of something happening. And when it comes to the consequences, you heard from both me and Dr. Toje about this sort of ultimate, I wasn't even talking about the impacts of radiation. I wasn't even talking in the US, Russia, using 1/3 of their nuclear arsenals kind of nuclear war. It's the estimate of people dying in the cities just from the attacks is 360 million people. That's just deaths within, the same day or within days. It's not including then millions more people die from radiation impacts. And then you add on this starvation from nuclear winter and nuclear famine. So the consequences are so dramatic and so scary and so devastating that the question we have to ask ourselves in terms of risk is, what sort of probability is then acceptable? What probability is acceptable to say, okay, I feel okay about this. Yes, it would be really, really bad, but the probability is so small that I understand it's not going to happen and it's okay. In my case, I put that number actually at 0. That would allow me to sleep at night, right? But let's think about where we actually are. And I'm going to bring up some quantitative work that has been done by Professor Martin Hellman at Stanford University. Professor Hellman is actually, his work, he's an emeritus professor of electrical engineering and is one of the fathers of cryptography. Every time you do something where you're sending a message or that information gets encoded in a way that other people can't see it. And for this, he won the kind of Nobel Prize of Computer Science. It's the Alan Turing Award, so it's a different award. But he's certainly someone who can think quantitatively. And he goes through this actually fairly simple analysis of thinking about a range of magnitudes and trying to justify where, and he says, maybe we're just talking, over a range of 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, so 10 to 100-fold. But let's think about which ones would make sense. And he starts with something as dramatic as 1% per day that we use a nuclear weapon and goes through why that's not reasonable. And then goes further, and then comes to 3 numbers, 0.1% per year, 1% per year, or 10% per year. And for 10% per year, he says, well, if it were 10% per year, in the course of the nuclear age, there would be less than a 1 in 500 chance that we wouldn't have had a nuclear weapon use. So he says it's not that. And then he goes through 0.1% and concludes that 0.1% per year would mean that we go on for 1,000 years with these nuclear weapon arsenals without anything ever going wrong. And so he goes back through all the accidents, the close calls, Cuban Missile Crisis, all of the things that could have led, and says that's not reasonable either, and settles on 1% per year. And I just want to give you a sense for what 1% per year, and whether that's exactly right or a little off, doesn't matter so much as the kind of, for illustrative purposes of what it is that we're talking about. 1% per year means that a child born today, if their expected lifetime is to be 80 years, it means that during the course of their life, there's a more than 50% chance that there will be nuclear weapon use. Now, that's just nuclear weapon use of, say, one nuclear weapon. The problem is that other considerations, and this is often done by people in Washington, what they call war games, show us that once one is used, this is no longer 1945, right? In 1945, we had 3 weapons and we used all 3 of them. Well, tested 1 and used 2, you could say. So with these thousands of weapons, all the simulations show that there is no off-ramp. You use 1, and then it just escalates and blows up, and the next thing you know, you have widespread nuclear war. And both in terms of local, call it regional conflicts like India, Pakistan, versus something like United States and Russia. And so if the consequence of that is then this kind of nuclear winter, so, hundreds of millions die in attacks and so on, and then billions die from starvation, that is no longer just a question of the national governments that have nuclear weapons. That's a question for all of humanity. And again, to me, the answer is that the only acceptable probability, 1% is clearly way too high. Are there things we can do in the meantime before we get rid of all of them that will make that safer? Certainly. But given the consequences, the only acceptable answer has to be 0, and we have to achieve 0.
Thank you so much for helping us all think much clearer about what risk is in this context. And let me add a tiny little layer to that, because there's also, when it comes to impact, there's also an issue of timeline, isn't it? I mean, when you used the data in your opening remarks, stating that what we are actually risking here is 5.1 billion human lives from the time of launch of the first nuclear weapon throughout the nuclear winter. Okay, but there's a time axis, which is kind of interesting when we talk about civilization, and what Toje mentioned too. Humanity, our civilization as a whole is actually under threat. What I'm thinking about is, when is it that the, let's say, impact of such a large-scale nuclear exchange is over? Well, it's about 24,000 years, isn't it, before the radiological poisoning is gone. And what's happened then? We have no history. We have no technology of the industrial age. We're in a very, very, very different type of environment.
Yeah, well, this was referred to earlier, the famous quote of, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones, right? I think about this so much, and I always recognize that I cannot possibly imagine what that would look like. I just know that it's really, really, really bad. But on radiation, let me just give one small example. We have done work at Columbia University to ascertain radiological conditions in the Marshall Islands where the United States tested nuclear weapons from 1946 to 1958. In a period of 12 years, the United States tested the equivalent of 7,000 Hiroshima bombs. That's like 1.6 Hiroshima bombs every single day for 12 years. Okay, so that's the background, and those were just quote unquote tests. Still to this day, there are islands in the Marshall Islands. There are atolls. This is a nation made up of coral atolls, 29 of them, that can still not be inhabited by people because of the radiological contamination. And so it just to give you a sense, and not to even talk about the devastation that that has caused over the decades and continues to cause, but just to say that this is unlike, so we are all suffering from everything we hear about Ukraine, about Gaza, about all of the other places. But one can imagine, right, that these conflicts end and that we go back and we rebuild these cities. You cannot rebuild a city that has been destroyed because the bombs we have today are not Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Those were the sort of child's play kind of nuclear weapons. The weapons that would be used today are hundreds, probably dozens or hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And moreover, we have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can take 10 bombs at the same time. For example, Russia has these 800 kiloton bombs, so that's more than close to 60 equivalents of Hiroshima bomb, but they can put 10 of them on one missile and send, I don't know, 5 to Washington, 5 to New York City. You could, do it, and you create these fireballs in different places, and who knows, it's devastating what happens after that.
Absolutely. So the war after the nuclear war will be fought with sticks and stones. So we're back to being hunters and gatherers. That's an interesting thing with those 24,000 years, isn't it? Because it took us about 12,000 years to build this civilization that we have. So twice the time, and we're back to being hunters and gatherers. So you mentioned this scenario being played out. One very nice book I read yesterday about this, Anne Jacobson. She has a fantastic book out this week, which is called A Nuclear Warfare, a Scenario. And it goes through, in part 5 of that book, goes through exactly what Ivana talked about. What would that world look like after radiation? And that's a very interesting read for all of us. Okay, Dr. Toje, you mentioned that Obama Prize, that was controversial. Why was that?
Well, obviously, as a member of the Nobel Committee, I will stand by every Nobel Prize. I think that from the view of the people on the panel, I think that there was pretty widespread disappointment in the Obama administration's lack of follow-through when it came to nuclear disarmament. I think that in certain quarters there was an eagerness to ridicule anything that was associated with Barack Obama. That has something to do with the optics of American politics, which it seems to be very binary and also incredibly distrustful. It's a sad thing to behold, American politics right now, I have to say. But I think President Obama encountered the same as many other world leaders, and that is that they might venture into the halls of power with an ambition to do something for nuclear disarmament, and are then quickly disabused by their own security apparatus, who informs them about the price of acquiring a similar level of deterrence without nuclear weapons, and having to slash this and that budget, and so they just push the can down to the next generation and hope somebody else is going to do something about it. For me, I came out of a war studies tradition at Columbia University and Cambridge University, and in the Waltz tradition, where we have traditionally been pretty macho when it comes to nuclear weapons. Ken Waltz said that like the solution to nuclear weapons is that more countries should have nuclear weapons, more deterrence, it's going to be fine. unfortunately, while I fully subscribe to this view, while being one of Professor Waltz's students, my own lived experience with international diplomacy and international leaders made me question the point underpinning his analysis, and that is rationality, and also a capacity to think long term. And I don't really see that in all global leaders. Many of them are incapable of thinking past the next week, certainly not beyond the next election. So to think in terms of 24,000 years of consequences of an action is perhaps even too much to think, I think, for many leaders. And that is why I think it's so important for you as citizens of your countries, but more importantly, citizens of the world, to remind ourselves that we do have a voice, and that we are currently in a country that enjoys the freedom of speech, and that we should let our voices be heard, because as Dr. Hughes so eloquently pointed out, these are weapons of genocide. They are not military weapons that can win you a battle of Solferino. It's not that kind of weapons. They're weapons that are made to be targeted against civilian population centers and kill everyone. They are weapons of genocide, and it's unacceptable that we have produced them in such numbers. And it's also very saddening to see that right now in 2024, the world's leaders are revamping their nuclear arsenals and fully subscribing to what I see as the more vulgar nuclear arms doctrines of the 1950s. And that goes back to the lack of knowledge. You would assume that once you become prime minister or president in a country that has a nuclear arsenal, you would be subjugated to a very rigorous regime where you would meet Professor Potter and Dr. Hughes, and they would explain in detail what weapons you now have and what the consequences of their use will be. But that doesn't really happen. And I think that the downside of being citizens in a democracy is that it comes with a lot of responsibility. And we're not really often reflecting on that. We're always reflecting on, what can the state do for us and our rights. But being members of democracies, we actually do govern ourselves. We shall not be so downcast about our ability to shape our own government. We still live in democracies. Our voices can still be heard. And for me, a few years back, I had this sort of almost, conversion, where I realized that the time that I don't spend doing my work and looking after my family, the one cause that is most logical for me to spend my time on is a nuclear issue, a nuclear disarmament, because I could not forgive myself if I didn't. The threat is so great, the impact is so horrible, and someone needs to speak out on behalf of our species, not of our nation states or our religious groups or whatever group we divide ourselves into, but to speak out for humanity. And I do believe that we are worth saving. I do believe that we deserve another shot, even if we are imperfect. Anybody who switches on the television or reads a newspaper will get that abundantly clear. But there's also something good about humans. And I hope that the people that I mentioned in my address, the people who have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, if you have a spare moment, revisit some of these names and their careers. And I hope that you will find inspiration to perhaps walk a few miles in their shoes. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes. So this is when the audience gets ready to ask some questions, because in just a very short time you will get a chance, and we will have a 30 minutes Q&A, and then we have refreshments for 30 minutes, which is where you take the conversation even further. But just on the controversy with Obama, I'm just going to ask Potter about a couple of small things there, because what happened was that back in 2009, in the summer of 2009, Dr. Potter was at the Nobel Institute as a visiting scholar. Now, the Obama Prize was announced in the fall, so I don't know exactly, but I have a feeling that you saw something there of that controversy. Did you?
I saw controversies, but not with respect to this particular nomination.
Okay.
I mean, the process is really very closely held, and while I met with several members of the committee, and I had a good friend who was the backup to one of the members, I had no clue about Obama. But I would push back just a little bit here. I mean, in Russian they would say "всё относительно," you know, it's all relative. And so when one can certainly point to the failures of the Obama administration, and I was one who actually watched first. Well, I happened to be at a big conference, a Carnegie Endowment conference. Was a huge gathering, and they showed live the scenes in Prague when President Obama was speaking, and there was a sense of tremendous energy and revival, and I sensed that also vividly at the NPT Review conference. It was kind of the Prague Spring, if you will, where there was a nuclear security summit, there was the NPT Review conference, there was the Prague speech, and so there was a sense of kind of a revival of enthusiasm for and hope about nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation and nuclear security. And I think while many of those hopes were not realized, one has to remember that the 2010 NPT Review Conference was the last one that produced a final document, and it included a very important component. There were 64 action items, 22 of which dealt with disarmament. Number 22 was the one dealing with disarmament, non-proliferation, education. And so that was very positive. You also had a nuclear security summit, the first one in 2010, which was very important because it was negotiated among an extraordinary group of players. I mean, you had an agreement, a consensus agreement involving countries such as Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Algeria, all sitting down in the room and drafting some rather important forward-looking documents that dealt with the threat of non-state actors. And you also, I think, I mean, you can go on and list a number of other accomplishments. At the time, we didn't think that was particularly substantial. It wasn't good enough. But in retrospect, those look like the great old days when progress was possible. What I worry about most, if I may, this may preempt something that someone also might ask, but I think it's tremendously important to note, and it builds upon Asle's very important point about Nina Tannenwald's work on nuclear taboos. It's very easy for a taboo or a norm to erode. It's exceptionally difficult to recreate. And one of the, I think, most important norms, which in a sense was reinforced by, if not codified by, the United States and Russia, and then subsequently in January 3rd of 2022, was an acknowledgement by the 5 nuclear weapon states recognized by the NPT that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Some refer to this as the Reagan-Gorbachev principle. That particular principle is very much under threat today. In fact, I was struck just about 10 days ago, one of the foremost Russian writers on nuclear security, nuclear nonproliferation, disarmament issues, basically said that principle may have been appropriate in the past, but it was no longer relevant to today. Hopefully that doesn't reflect formal government position, but it certainly has support from a number of parties. And so I worry tremendously that this norm that has served us so well and looked like we were moving in the right direction as recently as January of 2022, today is even more fragile than it was in the past.
Thank you so much. And I actually agree with you, Potter. I was there in 2010 at the NPT review as well, and I remember the enthusiasm that was building exactly from what you say, the Prague speech by Obama, which he actually got awarded for, let's say. And I remember how that played out in the discussion and how we ended up with 62 action points. Very important part of the picture. I totally agree with you. But now we have audience. Maybe Sophia, can you help us bring those, or just one mic down to the audience? Thank you. Oh, you have it in the back. Oh yeah, okay, you already have it. Sorry, I didn't see that. Please. No, you just see it, please. So we have there.
I think that, is it on?
No, perfect.
Yes.
I think that everybody who in this room would agree that it's desperately important for the United States and the Russian Federation to negotiate as hard as they can on this issue, to not only reach no first use, but also the abolition of nuclear weapons. But that hasn't happened. And the question is, why hasn't it happened? I'm curious to know how the panel would assign the blame for that not having happened up until now, as between the Russian Federation and the Soviets prior and the American government.
Let's have a
So I'm not going to put blame. I'm going to put what I expect and what I think should be happening. And what I think should be happening is for the United States to lead the world on nuclear disarmament. And I have a few reasons that are actually reasons that I think are the right reasons why we should do this. And then I'll tell you some other reasons that might make sense to some people. So first, the ones that I like. This is the country that we all, if you haven't seen the film Oppenheimer, it's fantastic. You should absolutely see it. It's the story of the beginning of the nuclear age, and yes, it was an American invention. We were the first to develop nuclear weapons. We're the only country to ever use them in attacks on on cities full of children, women, men, civilians. And we also, I mentioned the Marshall Islands, but we literally wrote the playbook for the nuclear testing era, which then ended up playing out around the world with all of the states that possess nuclear weapons having tested at some point and having, in fact, typically done it near indigenous and vulnerable populations with great harm being done. So I feel that there's a moral responsibility for the United States. We also like to lead the world. We want to be a world leader, period. Well, let's lead the world on nuclear disarmament. But at the same time, you can make a completely different, completely selfish argument, which is that the United States, it is what it is. It's this beautiful, large country. We have the kind of geographical positioning that it's very hard to imagine anyone else threatening us on our own soil. I'm not talking about fighting wars elsewhere, talking about fighting a war on our own soil. And nuclear weapons actually make it possible, not just for Russia and China to destroy the United States as we know it. Nuclear weapons make it possible for a country like North Korea to destroy the United States as we know it. North Korea is now estimated, the latest estimate I've seen is about 50 nuclear warheads. And they have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach every part of the United States. That means that we are vulnerable to North Korea and vulnerable to being destroyed as a nation by North Korea. Doesn't matter, you can tell me, oh, but then we'll destroy them. Well, maybe Kim Jong-un is feeling suicidal one day. I don't know, right? We are vulnerable. It doesn't matter what would happen to them. We are vulnerable to them. And North Korea has a population that's 56th in the world, and it has a GDP per capita that's in the bottom 10% of GDP per capita world rankings. So to me, it's not, I like the moral and ethical argument about why we should lead the world on disarmament, but if we want to survive as a nation, I think it's irresponsible leadership that's gotten us to this point where we are as vulnerable as we are. And then we've also, empires have come and gone, right? But this time we can literally take the rest of humanity with us, and that's not acceptable.
Thank you. Another question, please? There we have it. Please.
Thank you so much for today's. So I have a question. So the question itself is how to maintain hope during the time other than being angry or powerless. And let me elaborate the question behind. So I had the opportunity to talk with the survivors, or the second generation, third generation survivor who are working towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. And then throughout all the occurrence happening right now, they tend to go up, okay, I'm so hopeful now, but okay, what's going on now? And then what if I cannot see the future without nuclear weapons within my lifetime? That's the message that I've been hearing a lot of times. And then Dr. Hughes mentioning about the interconnectedness of all the individuals, regardless where they're from, the nuclear, once it exploded, the impact itself will be greater, more than the nation itself, the whole society, whole humanity. And Dr. Toje mentioning how to increase taboo among youth generations. And then Dr. Porter mentioned how to think, being critical. Be critical thinking is such an important aspect when it comes to nuclearism education. And then I believe not being interested in for this issue to being interested in is such an important aspect for those in society. Because not like here, not many people are interested in nuclear issues now. However, the challenges that young generation faces after they being interested in is I feel so powerless. What I cannot do, what I can change the world because I don't have direct impact to the world. How you, all of the panelists will deliver the messages for those who young generation feel powerless but want to make some changes to the world, carrying the survivors' experiences.
Thank you so much. Anyone feel ready to tackle that one? Toje.
Well, I was trying to look up a quote that Prime Minister Winston Churchill, his advice to the young, where he was saying, "Be kind, but be fierce. You are needed now more than ever before." And that message, I think, is the message from our generation to you, the young. You cannot afford to be downcast or to feel defeated by structures that were put in place long before you were born. Anything that has been made by man can also be unmade by man. But I like this advice, to be kind, but you also need to be fierce. Fierce, not to give up. And I think that, you know why there are so many pessimists that are working alongside Potter? This is just a personal observation. I think that, I'm a pessimist too, so I'm going to talk up the pessimists here. I think that pessimists, we tend to be, we don't expect so much, and therefore we don't usually get so downcast because the world tends to conform with our quite downcast hopes. And sometimes, idealists and optimists, with confronted with the reality, they become cynics. And there's nothing more sad to see than a young cynic. Please don't be cynics. The challenge is great, but we made it so far. We have made it so far without burning down the planet. And I hope that your generation will do as good a job as, at least, as generations before, at least to maintain the nuclear taboo, to at least to make sure we live to fight another day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for today. My name is Asle. I'm an international student from Kyrgyzstan. And back home, I have an environmental project where we visit schools and educate local students about the importance of the environment. And Dr. Toje, you mentioned about the climate change and the importance of thinking about the consequences of that. And my questions for you is, what is the right approach to teach about the environment, bringing the topic of peace and nuclear weapons?
Wow. My question to you is, how is Kyrgyz food so delicious? I was taken to a Kyrgyz restaurant in London a week ago, and it was a revelation. You know, like everybody, you should check out the Kyrgyz food. It is like one of the most greatest surprises and happy coincidences in my most recent life. I don't have a very rich life, but you know, like a Kyrgyz restaurant, that was one for the history books. How to teach? I think that nuclear climate change fits quite well with the overall knowledge about the impact of the ongoing climate change. It's just the instant version. You know, all the bad stuff that comes with the global climate change that we estimate in decades and centuries coming in the future, all of that will happen in a matter of months and years in terms of a full-scale nuclear war. So I think that you should compartmentalize it in that part of learning about the environment. But one thing that I've also been quite conscious of when raising my own children is that environmentalism, sometimes it can get overly abstract, you know, like, so, you know, like it happens you know, like through actions and blocking roads or, you know, last generation, it's all a bit silly. I think that your engagement for the climate and against nuclear weapons should ideally also be, you know, coupled with a love of nature. I think one of the challenges for us as a species is that we've taken this beautiful, beautiful planet and turned it into a parking lot. And there is nothing more beautiful to see than something growing. So I hope that you will also take time to plant a couple of trees along your ways.
Thank you. Dr. Potter, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm intervening for two reasons. One, I have a special affection for Kyrgyzstan, having served as an advisor to the Kyrgyz and participated as a member of the Kyrgyz delegation since 1995, when Rosa Atunbayeva appointed me, and my boss was the son of Mr. Aitmatov, who is featured as one of the supporters, early founders of the center here. But it is always difficult for me to be very optimistic, but I will try on this occasion to do so. And it's also a response in part to your question. The Central Asia nuclear weapons-free zone, of which Kyrgyzstan is a part, was really driven not by international security considerations. It was driven first and foremost by a concern about environmental factors, and particularly the issue of uranium tailings, which was a problem for 4 of the 5 republics in Central Asia. And it's a longer story. I'd be interested in sharing it with you subsequently. But to give you something perhaps which is an anomaly, but I think is important. When I first visited Semipalatinsk, I had been to Kurchatov, but I went to the epicenter, the very first test site. And I went there a few days before the first meeting of the Central Asian Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone that was held in Tashkent. And amazingly, I saw at the epicenter in Semipalatinsk a blue flower blooming. And I plucked that flower, and in my opening remarks at this conference, which was hosted by President Karimov, I held that flower up and as a symbol of what was possible. And I saw the Central Asian zone as having this tremendous potential promise. as an aside, when I brought the flower home, and Masako, who's with me, can recall this, I wanted to put it up in our seminar room, and my staff were petrified that I was putting up a radioactive flower. But nonetheless, and the flower still hangs in my office. It's faded. But I think there was hope. And I see the cooperation among the 5 Central Asian states, which had no history of cooperation, with respect to environmental issues, is something that's positive and hopefully will be replicated in other regions of the world.
Thank you so much. Ivana, please.
Yeah, so let me just, since I consider myself an optimist and I'm now sitting next to 2 pessimists, I want to just give it the optimist side, which is that I don't think I could do this work if I were a pessimist. I actually don't think it would be possible. I do this work because I believe that we can and will get rid of nuclear weapons in my lifetime. The other thing is, since you asked about climate change, I think it's really critical, and Dr. Toje kind of addressed this square on in the way that with nuclear weapons, it's so dramatic and it's so fast. But climate change in and of itself, the anthropogenic climate change, the rising temperature, is all that's coming along with that, is another existential threat, and one that we also have to address. And in some sense, I want you to think that it's not, imagine that in, say, 20 years, we've gotten rid of all nuclear weapons, but the world is just ravaged by climate change. That would not be a good world. Or vice versa, that we actually, do this transition, which we must do, to renewable sources of energy. And it's not just a matter of, personal decisions we make. This is really about big scale government policies and making the actual transition that's needed. But at the same time, in 10, 20 years, we blow ourselves up in a nuclear war. So in some sense, the burden on your generation is to bring these issues together and to see them as sort of symptoms of the same underlying problems and diseases and these existential threats that just must be eliminated. And we need to leave to all of you a world in which you can have and lead meaningful lives and carry that on for generations to come.
Thank you. One last question. Here. Yeah. One more last question before we continue the conversation over refreshments. Yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kano Miwata, and I'm a sophomore at Western School. I came here with my twin sister, Mono, and we're both very, very passionate in building a peaceful world with it being nuclear-free. But however, I do acknowledge that this topic isn't talked about a lot compared to like climate change or poverty, and it's a lot more abstract and complicated. So I was wondering, are there any advice that you guys have in which you can facilitate this conversation amongst youth in a better sense? Is there a way that you have some concrete steps in which we can do to promote this topic, especially among the youth, which Dr. Toje, you mentioned how the United Nations also supports this and how they also encourage and engage communication amongst the youth as well.
Thank you so much. Anyone?
It's a direct question. I'll give you a direct answer. What I would really love for you youngsters to do is to create an online anti-nuclear culture. We need your generation to, our generations, we were writing reports and putting up posters and torchlit vigilance and stuff like that. Right now, we need you on TikTok. We need you on YouTube. We need you to create memes. We need you to communicate with young people where they're at. And we need you to take the messages that you hear from people of knowledge, people like Dr. Hughes and Professor Potter, and bring that forth. We need your voices. You need your voices to be our voices. That is my humble request to the young people. And there are many people here at the university who are very savvy with social media. I've seen it. So that's one thing that you can do. And just If I may, there's a young lady on the first row that should be allowed to ask your first question. She was the first one to raise her hand.
Sure.
So would that be okay?
That's okay. There she comes.
Thank you so much again for this day and for the speeches that you gave. It was amazing. It was very inspiring, I'm sure, for everybody of us. But I wanted to ask a question. Coming from a Ukrainian background, I have a full understanding that Ukrainian war and Russian invasion probably would never happen if Ukraine didn't give up their nuclear arsenal during the Budapest Memorandum. Coming further to the current recent Donald Trump's speech that stated that he has no potential desire in protecting NATO countries if the invasion by Russia or any other countries actually happens. So which leads to Germany from also kind of an inside view into that country, the desire to gain the nuclear arsenal. And my ultimate question is, what are the stimulus that you see for the countries to increase and accelerate the nuclear disarmament, as well as the direct consequences that the leader can experience?
Thank you so much.
Well, let me try to answer at least a portion of the question. I want to start with the premise that you suggested, which I don't agree with. I wrote a study some time ago. Actually, I worked a little bit on it when I was at the Nobel Peace Institute, nuclear renunciation decisions. And I had the opportunity in 1994 to begin to interview senior officials in Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan to look at the question of what they should do and how they should proceed with respect to the nuclear arsenals that they inherited on their territory. And what I found in Ukraine was a situation where it was not obvious to me, or I think to most Ukrainian policymakers, how the retention of nuclear weapons would actually in any way enhance Ukraine's security, because the main challenges that they faced were of an economic nature. And so I would argue that in fact Ukraine made the right decision to part with the nuclear weapons that it had on its territory. It wouldn't have served their interests at that point in time. And I think if anything, it would have increased the likelihood of action by Russia to deal with those weapons in an earlier period. That's not to say that the Budapest Memorandum, which I think entered into force with the intent by all of the parties to honor it, can be tolerated, the breach of that. And so it's a tremendously damaging development with respect to the notion of guarantees, security guarantees or security assurances. And I think a lot of other countries are watching what transpires in Ukraine to see whether or not the West and the United States in particular can be counted upon to come to their support and to preserve their territorial, integrity. So on the one hand, I don't think nuclear weapons would have been helpful to Ukraine in the period from '94 until 30 years later. On the other hand, I do think that the actions that states take today with respect to the war in Ukraine does have a bearing in terms of nuclear decisions going forward on the part of many countries.
Yeah, just very briefly, and this is a much longer conversation about nuclear deterrence. I happen to think that nuclear deterrence is a myth. And in the words of the new executive director of ICANN, Melissa Park, nuclear deterrence will work until the day it doesn't, right? So there's no plan B. There's never been a plan B for what happens if what you think will happen doesn't actually happen. The notion that a country needs nuclear weapons to be safe and secure would lead to the conclusion that every country should have nuclear weapons. And of course, we can all recognize that that's just quite simply preposterous. If every country had nuclear weapons, we simply would not be here, because lots of bad things would have happened. But I'm happy to talk afterwards about nuclear deterrence and why that, just as a general principle, is not what we need today.
Some last words, Toje?
Well, I just want to thank you all for taking this drizzly Orange County afternoon to spend with us. I think that it really means something, and I'm really happy that so many of you showed up. And I just apologize that it was such a dark theme, but I hope that you gained some hope from this. And thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for our excellent panel. Really a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you.